Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to our first ever Forest Focus live show. It is genuinely great to have you with us, and I do appreciate all the support you've given us since December. We'll do our best to give you a good evening, much more Fulham at home than Fulham away. And helping me to do that, first of all, is broadcaster and Forest fan, Darren Fletcher. And one of the club's very best players in the Championship years, and a lovely man in Lewis McGugan. I'll kick off with Fletch. I remember when Nuno was appointed, I think we spoke on the phone, and you said, steady appointment, get us to where we need to be, solid if unspectacular. How are you feeling about it now, whatever, 3 months later?
Not as solid as I thought, and less spectacular. Is this working? Yeah. I think it's fine. I think it's always difficult for anybody when they come in the situation he came in. I think from a Forest perspective, the amount of change again in the summer made it difficult for Steve at the outset. The players that I speak to tell me that it's a different environment, better in some regards and not quite so good in others. But I think it's just a case of getting through the season and then re-evaluating where they are. Whether he's the long-term solution, I must say I've got my doubts based on what I've seen to this point. But I think the caveat I'd put in and the pass that I'd give him would be that he's come into a very difficult environment based on the Africa Cup of Nations, the injuries that he's had. He's not had a great deal of time to work on what he needs to work on. So I think that's always got to be taken into account. But whether he's the long-term answer and the manager that can take them from where they are now to where the owner wants them to be, I think is still a question that has to be answered. I don't think we've seen evidence of that to this point.
No, listen, I think Fletcher's right. I think he's made very good points there. I think it's always difficult, any manager coming in the middle of the season and any part of the season. I think that any manager that takes over a team always wants a pre-season. That's where they do their best work, and that's where they want to get judged on. So I think, like I said, it's really difficult to come in and to take any team mid-season. I think that the main objective is to stay in the Premier League. Hopefully, over this period of time, he can start to implement his ideas and the way he wants to work day to day and on obviously match days. And I think he'll be doing that. But from his personal view, I'm sure that he'll be speaking to the people above him, also the players, that he'll want a full pre-season, a full transfer window to really stamp his authority.
Matt, the issue I think they have, which is kind of away from him, is just the setup in general. That I don't think you can have this amount of change as frequently as they have it and it be successful. It might work in other countries where leagues are different, and it might work if you're the owner of the biggest club and the most successful club in that league. Evangelos Marinakis isn't here. He's the owner of a club with a fantastic heritage, a great fan base, in a mad keen football city, but it's a club that's trying to find its way again in the top flight. And I think the issue is, one of the special aspects of last season was the connection from the fan base to the playing staff. That was reciprocated by the players because a lot of people had been through it together. There was enough in the group that had experienced everything. The lows, the resurrection, the promotion. Then it was all hands to the pumps in the city to survive. And I think my biggest disappointment this season is I think a lot of that's gone. I wouldn't go as far as to say the heart's been ripped out of it, but the connection's gone. Joe's now at Fenerbahce, Brennan's at Tottenham, which they had to do. Ryan Yates is the only one left. And you've got a lot of players who have come in from all different leagues and all different clubs. Whether they get the city, whether they get the club, I don't know. But it's difficult then to connect with that group, and it's also difficult for them to get what the City ground is. So what was a real strength last season, everybody in it together, That might not be the case now because we don't have players with a connection to where they are. A lot of those players are here because this club's paying them more than the other ones who were trying to get them in the summer were prepared to. That might sound harsh and cynical, but that's the way it is. And I think one of the big differences this season to last season is, yes, the talent level might be higher within the group because that was the general idea. But whether it feels the same and whether that can give you the kind of momentum and the kind of passion that you need to see on a Saturday or on a Wednesday night, I think that's the biggest question that needs to be answered. I think the crowd are doing their bit. Whether the players then pick up and respond to that, as they did last season, remains to be seen in what's left in the remaining games. But that to me is the biggest difference. It just felt like everybody was in it together last season and it worked. And this season it feels like not necessarily a team of strangers, but a lot more than it did last season. And I think that's one of the bigger weaknesses that we have now.
What's it like to play in that? Chaos isn't the right word, but the change between transfer of players, Lewis. Because I think between Billy's first spell and Billy's second spell, and you had that steady group first time around with Billy, and second time I think it was pretty different by the sound of it. What's it like being in that environment with that churn every year?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's just a reality of football. Along with you look at a few seasons ago and the heights that we got to in terms of the football club, in terms of the team, the connection, the city, it was a real high, and that's something that we'll always kind of keep with us. But I think when you look at football in general and you look across the board, most teams that when they get promoted, they'll probably ride that wave for 1-2 seasons maybe, and then the matter of time is the reality of football. People will then drift apart, people will drift from that squad, there'll be new kind of influx of players. That's the reality and the harshness of the downside, because it's like everything that we achieved 2 years ago and get promoted, and that team and that connection, it does stay there, but eventually it will move on, and that's just the cycle of football. And I think now it's the case of, can the manager, can the players that are still there, can the players coming in along with the owner and the people around him, they've got to keep creating that identity that every player that walks through that door understands what it means to play for this football club, understands what the connection is, the connection that we've had, and to keep riding that wave. And sometimes, like Fletcher's first point, with a lot of change, that can kind of get lost. But I think it's down to the important people in the club to keep that going.
Just take a bit of a straw poll of people who are, I suppose, sold and not sold on Nuno, or yet to be convinced. Is anyone yet to be convinced? Oh gosh, that's a lot. Okay, the next few games are going to be interesting. I suppose Fletcher's question is, to me, is this going to go to the last stage, you think, at Burnley? Will we be panicking to that extent?
I think there's every chance it goes to beyond the last day, doesn't it? With appeals and everything else. I mean, the whole Premier League at the moment is a shambles. All of these PSR decisions, need to be explained better to everybody. They need to seem a lot more consistent, and there's every chance that we're going to get to the final day and people are going to be celebrating on various pitches around the league, and then those celebrations could be wiped off in an appeal room 2 weeks later, which, if that's the way the competition's going to be run, then Lord help us moving forward. I saw today that Sheffield United are going to start with a points deduction the next time they play in the Championship, so that's going to follow them into next season. Look, it is probably going to go to the final day. I think it's difficult to make a case for any of them down there being good enough and consistent enough at this stage to win enough matches to pull away. I think if any team's going to do that, then you'd like to think it's Forest based on what they have. But Luton are like this nagging sore. They just won't go away. They've got this remarkable ability to stay in games, to score late goals, to do the kind of things that over the seasons have often been enough to keep you up. And I didn't think they could keep playing like this for this long. I think the dinner with Temps is safe because they're not going to get the points total that he talked about. So I think he's going to be taking me out rather than the other way round. But they are finding a way to stick in there. Everton aren't going to go away because they've lost a couple more. So I think it's a case of batten down the hatches, stick with the team, and then let's keep our fingers crossed they can get enough points. But I don't think this is going to end before the final day, no.
So what's going to keep us up, Lewis? Is it quality? Is it character? Because Luton have obviously got character. I don't know if they've got necessarily the quality that we have, but we just can't get the wins. So what is it? What's the factor that's going to keep us in the Premier League?
I think, to be honest, I think it's everything. I think all them little things are going to have to come to a collective unit to stay in the Premier League. It's not going to be easy. I mentioned at the start of the week on the podcast that I feel as long as we keep giving Luton lifelines, and I think they keep being in the change room and understanding being in that position, that every time they're looking, they think they've still got a chance. I think the main thing is we've got to try and create that gap. We've got to try and take the kind of emphasis away from them, take the kind of that willpower that they've got going into every game. We've got to take it from them, because at this point in time, every time they're going into a game, they're thinking, yes, we can get a result, Nottingham Forest might slip up. So, like I said, I think with Fletcher's point about it's gonna keep on going at least for another 2-3 weeks, at least, to see anything different. But after kind of this weekend, where Luton and Manchester City, after that they've got games where they probably feel like they can go and get a result. So I think it's that point of trying to stay in the Premier League, to play for a Premier League football club, to play for this football club. It's pressure, and that's something that the players and the manager and everyone connected to the football club have got to accept, that it's that time now, and we can't shirk the challenge. We've got to stand up and be counted, and be ready for the battle.
Is that one of the stories of the season, Fletch, around lifelines? Like, I just feel we haven't grabbed any of the opportunities that we have when we go to games, like Brighton away, where I thought Nuno really messed the team up. And there's been other opportunities. And we keep handing teams lifelines as well. Both games against Luton we should have won. Is that one of the primary reasons why we are where we are, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's difficult to work out why the team is where it is. There's been so much instability, inconsistency, individual mistakes, strange team selections in recent times. I mean, a lot of it's been slightly confusing. I think the big issue Forest have had this year that they'd managed to work out by this stage of last season. And let's not forget, in the early weeks of last season, probably 3/4 of the season, we conceded far too many goals and we were far too open and didn't seem to grasp what it was like to play in the Premier League. But by the end of the season, they'd managed to work out how to game manage well. 1-0 wins, hanging on, making sure they got across the line. That was the feature. The biggest issue, I think, for this team, they can't manage situations. I said to somebody in the week, Luton, Burnley, Luton. 3 games, 3 teams, bottom 3, 6 points dropped. The other teams who are good in the Premier League aren't doing that. They're playing the bottom 3, they're picking up wins, it's pulling them clear. Forest can't do it. They've been ahead in all 3 of those games and conceded goals in the second half, sometimes late, and it's cost them. And you have to game manage better in the Premier League. We can all get carried away by signing big stars, playing a brand of football, but a lot of this is about game management. Lou will tell you that from his time. When you get to the top level, once you get a lead, make sure you don't lose it. Forest haven't been good enough at that. They've lost, I think, the most points from winning positions in the league. They've conceded a ridiculous amount of goals when they've had the lead, and that's just not good enough. And the biggest thing they've got to learn over the course of the rest of this season and into next is how to manage game situations better, because they've been in a position to be safe as houses in the Premier League this season and found a way to give them away. So that's the reason why they're down there. It's not a lack of talent, it's not a lack of investment, and it's not the brand of football. It's a case of having a lead and then not being able to keep it far too often. And that's why they've dropped down the league and find themselves where they are.
So is that a lack of leadership, a lack of experience, Lewis? When you look at that team, I feel like they're a bit of a soft touch sometimes. Is that a fair thing to brand them with?
No, like I said, I think if you look at across the squad, across the whole squad, I think there's not many players that are probably seasoned out Premiership players that have gone and done it for 5-6 years running. When you look at them games, when you're in them games, and sometimes perfect example, Fulham, perfect first half, incredible football. Fulham go and score straight after our time. You can feel it. Everyone can feel it. You can feel it in the stadium. And to be fair, that's what I said. The little moments that sometimes you need a bit of luck, and we got a little bit of luck on that night because Fulham probably go and score a second. I think it ends up at least with taking a point, or we could lose the game. And I think we've probably been in that scenario probably too many times. And back to your question, in the sense of the collective unit, it's experience, it's learning, It's getting through them moments and trying to survive. And if this group survives and stays in the Premier League, that will hold them in good stead for next season. And they've just got to build the squad. But when you look around, you need big characters, you need big players. Sometimes character to go, listen, we can stay here. Don't worry about it. We're going to stay here. We're going to fight this out. Because sometimes you can be fragile on there. If you haven't got that experience, the crowd gets up, the other team gets a bit of an oomph and starts going. Sometimes you can feel that. So I think in terms of moving forward, I think the bigger characters, and they might have to bring bigger, more experienced characters in the football club to help the inexperienced players to churn out and win games.
I didn't know there was going to be a helicopter flying overhead for the first 15 minutes of this podcast. Sorry, I think it's gone. One thing I look to next season, Fletch, like if we do stay up, I think it's quite kind of exciting, because if we have a season of Matt Sells, that's a bit better than the season of Matt Turner. And, the back four is quite young. Murillo might go. We've got an attacking four that works. It's probably just maybe a case of fixing midfield. But if we do stay up, I feel like there is cause for optimism. Or am I just being a bit like Greg Mitchell, getting a bit overexcited?
No, I think there's always case for optimism, because they've got a very ambitious owner. So you know that he's going to be within the financial parameters that he's now got to work to. He's going to be aggressive. That's his nature. So that's not going to change. So yeah, everybody should be excited. You're not really going to go into a summer with Evangelos Marinakis as the owner and say, well, we haven't done anything. That's just not the way it's going to be. So yeah, it's exciting. And yes, there are players there with talent. And some of the players that they've signed have done well, some not so well. That's what happens when you sign so many. But yeah, there is the basis there of a good team. But I mean, my question back to you would be, how confident are you that all of those pieces are going to stay and they're not going to rip it all up again and start again based on what's happened this season? I mean, we don't know what the model is going to be at the end of this season moving into the next. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he just tinkers with it a little bit and adds to what he's got and tries to build it organically. Likewise, I'd be completely prepared for him ripping the whole thing up and shipping everybody out and starting again. I just don't know. I just know that instability isn't good at this level. All the teams that do well are stable. All the teams that do well have been built properly and have been given a chance to do what they're going to do. So it has to become more stable. It has to slow down at some stage. If that's this summer, then I'd be all for it.
No, I really hope they maintain the core of the group they've got, personally. I feel like it's there, and I hope they don't think, oh, we failed this season. I think Marinakis would view 17th as a failure. But if this squad stays together, you've probably been in dressing rooms where you feel like, okay, there's something here that we can build on next year. Do you kind of see that in this group potentially, Lewis?
Yeah, I think we had a really good conversation off air after the podcast on Monday. And when you look at the team, and you look at the Tottenham team, you think you've got a back four, you've got two centre-halves that are young. Yes, inexperienced and will make mistakes, but again, as a partnership, you think that they can grow together. And you've got a front four. We always talk about striking. We're always going to need to bring in the top-end strikers. But you've got a kind of a front four who are young, again, exciting, need to learn and need to get better and need to play more games at the highest level. But in terms of growing a squad together, I think it's very promising. I think the big thing for me is I think we need to go and get a midfield player, a proper next level midfield player. I use the example of Fulham, and you look at Paulinho and the example that he made. Sometimes you don't have to make 6, 7, 8 signings. You can make 2 or 3, the right ones, the right characters, the right ability, and they can change or completely transform a whole dressing room and a whole team. And I think that's what we have to look. Hopefully we stay in the league and we look towards the summer. I think we've had 2 years where the recruitment and in terms of transfers has been all over the place. But I think now that the scouting system, along with the owners and the manager, they need to really go and pinpoint, I think, 2 or 3 players in the key areas who's going to help this young team blossom.
The point is, though, Lou, they thought they'd done that this year. They went for Sangare early in the summer. They waited right until the end of the summer while he made his mind up whether he was going to come. 30 million quid's a massive outlay for one position in this club at this time. And they thought they got that midfielder. And the same recruitment team are going to go and try and find another one. Would you completely give up on that player after one season? Or would you look at it and say, AFCON, injuries, maybe give him a free pass and give him a year to settle in and see what he's like? Or would you just say, Sangare's not the one, we've got to go back in there, and this time we've got to get it right, but we've got to get that player again?
Yeah, on Sangare, I think you've always got to give him the opportunity of a full pre-season, a year. I'm not sure he's the answer. That's just my personal opinion. I think that clubs and what they've done, they've gone out and they thought they're making the right, but sometimes it doesn't work out, and that might not be down to the player and down to his ability. Sometimes there's a lot of outside stuff. Sometimes it just doesn't work out of a club. He could go to another club next season and be their best player. But I think that sometimes you have to admit maybe you got it wrong, or maybe it hasn't quite worked. But again, I think for that outlay, they've got to at least give him pre-season and the start of next season, but also be in the mind of trying to get a replacement and trying to get another midfielder regardless.
You must have seen Sangare in Europe a bit, Fletch. Has he not been what was advertised from what you thought?
He looks nothing like the player that was advertised. I don't know why that is. If you watched him play for PSV, he looked like a really good building block for Forest. You watch him play internationally, he looks like a really good building block for Forest, but it's just not worked out. I don't know why it is, no idea. I'm sure they don't either. I'm sure it's not helped by the fact he's picked up 1 or 2 injuries and had to go away for the Africa Cup of Nations halfway through in a season where he's finding it hard to settle in. I mean, I think it would be wise to give him a bit longer to try and work it out, because I find it difficult to believe that players become bad players. I mean, you might answer this better than me. I've never been in that position, but you are who you are. Sometimes circumstances don't suit, and maybe the emphasis should be on the club to make it work for him rather than the other way around, because the talent's in there, otherwise they wouldn't have paid 30 million quid for him.
No, there is that, and that's back to my point. Sometimes how many of us, we've all been fans and we've all been sitting here, how many strikers have come through to this football club, not really done well, gone on to another club, and the next season be a completely different player. And that's sometimes how simple it is. There's so many kind of outside factors what can come into it and make a person not perform. He's had a lot of kind of stop-start injuries. He's had to go away for the AFCON. So, yeah, a lot of things have gone against him. But, again, I think that's where the manager's got to look, and he's seeing him day to day. He's putting him into them games. Crystal Palace at home, I think that's what you've got to look at, that performance. Him coming off at half-time, what's damage that's done to him in terms of going forward. He might look and think, you know what, as some players do, it's just not going to work out here. I don't really feel it here. And he might have the kind of mindset thinking at the end of the season, he's going to go elsewhere. But again, sometimes it's not just about ability, about everyone wants to try, everyone's had the right intentions to bring him into the football club, including the player, but sometimes it just doesn't work out.
I think, again, that's your danger when you're changing the squad and the personnel as much as you are. It gives a player, if they're of that mindset, the license to say, well, at the end of the year, I'll just go then. It doesn't necessarily give them the incentive to be the best version of themselves. You've also got the instability in terms of managerial change, etc. How many midfield combinations has he been involved in this season? It's never really been settled in there. Lewis will tell you more than anybody in the room, you need to know what's around you. You need to settle into that system, and you need to know who's with you in certain situations in games, what the strengths of your teammates are, how you're all going to work together. It's never really been the case in there. But I do think that there will be a belief of some of the players who were brought in, well, we'll go and play there. If it doesn't work, they'll just sell us, we'll go somewhere else. And it's difficult to build if that's the mindset. And I think they've got to be careful of that moving forward. It can't be this constant change season upon season, transfer window after transfer window. At some point, they've got to settle on a group. They've got to work with it, and they've got to allow it to organically develop and become a Premier League team. And if they do that, there's no doubt they can be successful. But there's got to be more patience than we're seeing at the moment.
Let me just ask another hypothetical then. I've asked this to a couple of people, and Lewis included. We were talking about off air. If you're offered 25 million for Sangare from some random Saudi club, if you were in Forest shoes, would you take it?
Yeah. And then you see the issue becomes, you then go back into the transfer market with another 25 to 30, and you do it again. And are you going to get the right one this time? Because it's an inexact science. Because I didn't hear too many people complaining when he came in the summer. People who'd seen him would have said, he's a good player. It's not worked out. Now what do? Take what you can get and go again. But you've got to be sure you're going to get better than what you've got now. And that's the constant challenge.
Yeah, and like I said, with that then comes the pressure of the scouting department. That's what they're there for. Yeah. And again, they are they'll be under scrutiny, and they are judged by the players that come to this football club and how they perform. And like I said, sometimes what you have to do, you can't kind of be blind to it. And sometimes you try and do something, it hasn't quite worked out for all parties. Sometimes you've got to look at it and think, why is it best to move on, or is it best to kind of, like you said, to try and grind through and maybe there's some good on the other side. But again, I think the kind of jury's still out on him, and I think in terms of midfield in general, that's my point in terms of Summer looking at that area. I think that we've all talked about kind of the two's going to be the two. I think over the last 2 or 3 months we've kind of put on Yatesy because of what he brings to the team and the kind of job that he does. But again, we're always putting another one in with him, and we're always kind of changing that week to week. Well, that kind of says to you that there's not really much difference between the other options. And then again, that's where I think we need to try and go to that next level if we want to try and get where I'm sure the chairman wants to be, which is the top half of the Premier League.
I mean, the example would be on how it can change would be if we'd have sat here 6 months ago and asked the question that you've just asked about Sangare, about Chris Wood, there would have been a lot of people outside opening the car door prepared to drive him anywhere he wanted to go to get him away. And the manager changes and he comes in and he gets his confidence and he finds his form. And now we're going into the summer saying, well, he's out of contract and surely Forest have got to give him another year because he's playing so well. And right now, you'd pick him over Taiwo Awoniyi because of the way that he's playing. And nobody would have said that. So it is an example that these things aren't always permanent. If the talent's in there, circumstances can change and the player can change as well.
No, I completely agree. And I think that he's turned around, which I always said that he's a very good player. I've played against him numerous times. He is what he is. And if you play to his strengths, that he will come good. Just on, again, he's come and done well. But again, if you ask that then question, even though he's done well, would you be happy as a club and as a fan base to start next season with him being your number one striker? You probably wouldn't.
Not the number one, but he's done enough this season to be part of the group. I mean, they certainly need more than they've got.
Yeah, but again,
if he's your option off the bench, or your third option, even, you'd like him to be the third option, really, because you'd like Taiwo to be fit and maybe one better than him. If he's number 3, then you're well stacked in that department, aren't you?
But again, with that same argument with the Sangare, you ain't paying £30+ million for him to be a choice, an option. And that's my point, whereas Chris Wood has done fantastic to come good, to now be a real integral part of the squad moving forward to help out. But again, if you're spending £30 million on a player, he's coming to play every game and be a marquee player for that team, not part of a squad.
He's the best striker at the minute. No matter how old he is. Whatever team they pick right now, he's got to be in it. And if they don't get anybody better, that's got to be the case come August as well.
No, I don't disagree.
Not a lot's going to change.
Don't disagree. Like I said, he's had a lot of stick, and he's been out of the team for a long time. But he's come and he's come up trumps, and he's helped the team out when's needed. And say a striker's there to score goals, and that's what he's doing.
Do you know what, Matt? As well, let's just make the point here. We're sitting here, having been out of the top flight for 3 decades, and this could be so much worse. You know, this is going to be thrilling. It's going to be exciting. I'm confident by the end of the season they'll still be in the Premier League as well. I'm not overly concerned about that. I just know it's going to be a little bit bumpy the rest of the way, and it probably shouldn't have been based on who they signed in the summer and what they spent. But this is a golden time. This is a football club that's not experienced this. I mean, us as fans are living the dream. It's a long, long time since we could even talk about this club on the same level of the other Premier League sides. So, you know, let's put it into perspective and into focus. That, yeah, all right, it's a bit worrying right now and everybody's a bit concerned. But you wouldn't swap it for Barnsley away on a Wednesday night or anything like that, would you? Anytime soon. If it's 17th for the next 5 years, or the Championship or whatever, I'll take 17th for the next 5 years and shit my pants every Saturday afternoon. I'm not bothered, because this is where we've all wanted to be.
I guess as well, Lewis, you'd want to be in Forest's position in terms of it. As a player, you want it to be in your hands, don't you? And it's still in their hands to get themselves out of this.
Yeah, I've always said any kind of situation, regardless what end of the table is, if you can keep things in your hands and it's up to you every time you go out on the pitch on match day, and if you go and do your job, you're in the driving seat. So at this point in time we are, and that's what the main point we've got to keep into that position really. And again, the important thing is Saturday, again at home, against a Wolves team that have done very well this year, with a new manager, and they'll come wanting to take 3 points. But again, the atmosphere, the occasion, I think from now every game's got to be a cup final, and the atmosphere we talk about last year, again, it's now coming back, and being at the games now you can see it. And at the end of the day, we are going to have to carry the players through, and they're going to need us. And I think that's going to be a big thing from now coming to the end of the season.
You don't buy must win. You always play down this kind of, we're going to get 3 points in this fixture thing.
If you'd have gone through this last year and you'd have written down the games that you'd think Forest would win and the ones that they wouldn't, not too many people would have put win next to Arsenal, and that was the game that kept us up. If you think about early in the season when they won at Stamford Bridge, not too many people fancied us there. You nick results. I don't think it necessarily works like that. I think the longer the season goes, the pressure becomes unbearable for people, and officials have an impact on games. A decision that doesn't go your way, an injury to a key player that you can't foresee, can change the dynamic of everything. They've only got to finish a point better than Luton. I mean, the other two, forget about it. Sheffield United and Burnley are gone. They've got to finish a point better than Luton. How they get those points is irrelevant. There's always another game. There's always an opportunity to do it. Yes, it would be nice to get a bit of a cushion, so there is the opportunity to pull away, and that's important at this stage. That little cushion heaps the pressure on them. I don't think there's any such thing at this stage as a must-win game. If you get to the last game of the season, you've got to win to stay up. There's your must-win match. Until that point comes, you don't know when it's going to be, what's going to happen. And by the way, there's enough talent in this group to win games that we don't expect them to win. They've not been great at doing it, but the talent's there if they can manage themselves a little bit better. So they might just surprise us with a result that we're not expecting between now and the end of the season. But don't get into this must-win match at this stage. Just sit back and enjoy it. Get down there on Saturday, have a few pints, sing your hearts out, and the lads won't let you down. It's simple.
What about from a player's point of view then, Lewis? If you're in that dressing room, are they Camp Fletcher or are they with
He's
me?
not gone must win, this lad. He was the most laid-back fella in the room.
The other players...
He's never sat there and gone, got to win today, lads. He's gone, relax, calm down, everything's fine. I'll stick one in, get me a free kick 20 yards out, we'll nick it 1-0.
Billy Davis is doing the team choice. Say, this is a fucking must-win game, boys. What's he saying?
Yeah, no. I think the big thing that the players and the manager, that they're in control and they've got to keep their calm. And they, like I said, it's pressure. But again, you're playing in the Premier League. You're playing for a fantastic football club. It's going to be pressure every time you step onto the pitch. But again, I think they have to stay calm in that change room. There's a job to be done. And at the end of the day, it's 3 points. It's 3 points. That's it. We've got to go out there with the game plan. Hopefully, like we went on the front foot against Fulham, and get the 3 points. I'll
tell you what you do see at this stage of the season, and it's only now that it really dawns on you how important a point is in the Premier League. If you think of the amount of games where you'd have gone, they were trying to get a win, and if they'd have settled for a draw, but everybody wants them to go and win, the value of a point when you're a struggler in the Premier League can never be underestimated. We all get carried away with must win and 3 points, but those draws, Lou, make such a difference to your league position at the end, don't they?
Yeah, no.
You only ever stay up by a point, don't you? Really?
Yeah, and I think at certain times in certain places you'll go to stadiums, you'll even play at home sometimes, and you haven't really turned up, and you'll sit there in the change rooms after, and you'll probably think, you know what, it's a good point that is, and that point further down the line will help you or will come good. And again, I think it's just must not lose. It's not a must win, but again, we as long as we pick up something, again, we're just ticking another point off, and if we can keep that gap getting bigger and bigger to Luton, I think hopefully then kind of their strength and their kind of optimism that they've got will slowly fade.
Yeah. Maybe don't lose 6 games 3-2 as well. That would help.
Oh, don't get me started on 3-2s.
I know, terrible. Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2. Hopefully the mics work. We'll try and fix that as we go along. Sam's going to sort that out. If it goes wrong, blame Sam. Please welcome back Darren Fletcher. Lewis McGugan. And join us for the Q&A, Michael Temple. And Mikey Clarke. Thank you for all the questions. Loads and loads. Too many to get through in the next 55 minutes to an hour or so. But a lot of them on the same theme around the manager. Mikey's got an opinion on this. Do you think Nuno is the right manager to take us forward next season?
Nice, easy one to start with. Do I think he's right? But, I guess if you look at how... I think Fletch made a really good point, actually, in the first half, talking about some of the things that Nuno's had to deal with. There we go, like a microphone. Very, very valid as well. The hand he was dealt was difficult. I think that's probably fair to say. I think where my concerns lie are all the things that are within Nuno's control. So if you look at maybe some of his team selections, the way he reacts to what the opposition are doing, how he sets us up, some of his substitutions, his media, his demeanour, very, very different than the previous manager. I think that's probably fair to say. I think the jury's probably still out. I think the first things first is we've just got to stay up. That is primary before we start talking about players' futures, managers' futures, coaches, whatever. They just have to all stick together and stay up. However, if that happens and we stay up, I think the conversation probably needs to be had. Firstly, does he want to be here? Is this a project he still wants to do? If so, are we going to back him? How does that look? I think personally, if you're going to ask me, and I'm not going to sit here and lie, I have my doubts. But again, it depends on his point of view, the owner's point of view, and also who's out there as well. Who would, if we're going to make that change, who is it on the market or who is it that will want to come? So it's a bit of a woolly answer, I know, I appreciate. But if you're asking me, gut feel, I don't think he'll be here next season regardless. He certainly won't be here if we go down. And I think I'm probably swaying towards making a change personally.
Well, I think he wants to be if he's getting a Premier League manager's wage, I would say. I don't think he's going to walk. What about you? Lewis and Fletch have had their say already for the most part, Temps. What about you?
I want him to be here because that would be an indicator that all is well in the garden, relatively. As Mikey said, he's not going to be here if we're relegated. But if he stays up, which wasn't the brief, I think his brief was to kick on after he took over from Steve Cooper. He should be given the time next year. We've spoke about Sangare and his inability to ingratiate himself into the team. For Nuno to get a tune out of this group of players, which he hasn't necessarily put together in any major sense, you can come in as a gaffer and buy yourself time. Talk about needing 2, 3, 4 transfer windows to change X, Y, and Z. Blame the imbalanced squad you find, and buy yourself time. Spend that time. Trying to get things right. But time's a luxury you don't have. You need to have results. He came in flying with Man United, Newcastle, two of the best games of the year, right? And we're all backing him, thinking this feels right. We're going to kick on. This is the guy that's got the formula to take us up and up. And now it's dissipated. And I was hanging on to every word Fletch said earlier about the connection that we had with Steve Cooper. Wasn't necessarily off the back of the Premier League games that he managed. It was off the back of the journey from 24th in the Championship to Wembley. And we just attach so much meaning to that, so much positivity, so many days out that we absolutely loved and enjoyed. And that's why Cooper got more of a pass than a guy that's been here for 6 months will have. So I do think Nuno will be the gaffer next year. I think that's because we're going to stay in the Premier League. And I think given a transfer window and getting more from the players who are already there and underperforming, Sangare being the chief amongst those, I think he can kick us on and get us further away from the drop zone next year.
This one's probably... You didn't get a round of applause, Mikey. This one's probably specifically for Lewis, as he's actually played the game. And the question is, basically... Are players today, is it a generational thing? They see football as a job and more about, it says connecting with fans, but I guess living the dream of being a footballer. So, yeah, do players see a football career now as a job more than anything else?
No, if anything, I think it's gone the other way. I think with social media, with the kind of connection and the kind of connection that fans can have with players and as close as they can get, I think it's probably gone the other way. I think back when I first started playing and first started my first couple of seasons, there was kind of, apart from a match day, you wouldn't really integrate with fans unless it was kind of a fan day around the stadium, whereas now I think a lot of people have that kind of avenue and that they can come together very, very easily. So, listen, we all, anyone who grows up wants to be a professional footballer. That's the main thing. I think once you go to certain clubs, sometimes you go there, and if it's not homegrown, you go there and you kind of get that real feel straight away. You kind of attach to the fans very quickly, and vice versa. And I think that we can all say there's certain players that we can all think of. Maybe you've had straight away within the first few months, you've got that kind of attachment. Where there's sometimes players that you probably haven't felt that way. So I think it goes both ways. I think that all in all, it's a job. They're there to play football. But again, I think first and foremost, if you can have that mutual respect and that feeling and that connection for people who you're playing for, I think all in all, it's a win for everybody.
Fletch, you could speak to actually, because your son's in the Forest Academy. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't see it as a cash cow at the end of the day if he makes it, does he? It's his dream, isn't it, I guess? You might see it as a cash cow.
Yeah. I'd never thought about that until now. No, but I think he's the wrong person to talk about, really, because he's still a baby, really, and it's just this mad dream that so many kids have got that they might kick a football for a living. I don't think the way that clubs are structured now really allow for the relationship between the player and the supporter to be what it used to be. I mean, you knew for a fact that if you went to a football ground at a certain time, you could get the best player's autograph if you stood in the right place. You can't get within a million miles of the players now. So to get that connection is virtually impossible because they're not accessible. And when they are accessible, it tends to be a club-driven event where you're invited along and you can sit down and get things signed. The bigger clubs, you can't even do that anymore. And I think it's a real shame. I think that, when I was a kid, you'd go down to the ground and you'd see the players and you'd feel like you were meeting somebody special, and you were a lot of the time. You'd take your autograph book down and get the programme signed, special for kids. And I think when that happens, it also brings the player closer to the supporter, brings the community together. You're all in it together. You feel like you can touch these people. I think that's important. I think that the bigger the divide comes between the supporters and the players, the more difficult it becomes for the question that you've just asked to be answered, because it then maybe does become a job because they're not necessarily accountable, because they don't know really how the fans feel apart from the reaction for 90 minutes on a Saturday or a Wednesday. So I'd like to think that clubs in general could be more proactive in allowing supporters to get nearer to the players, the kids in particular, so that they can develop that relationship that we all had when we were younger.
I'll throw this one to Temps, I think. You did have strong words about John Joe Shelvey on one of these last year. So, yeah, straight in, two-footed. Is Origi the new John Joe Shelvey, is this question?
No. No, that's it. So this time last year, I said I'd drive John Joe Shelvey to where he wanted to be driven, and I think we were universally applauded. It was cheap heat, wasn't it? Because he'd been terrible. We'd just come off the back of that game where he'd given the ball away in his own box. He just looked completely disinterested from on field, off field. It never quite clicked for John Joe. You can't accuse Divock Origi of not trying. I think there's been some instances where he's come on and shown flashes. Fact is, he hasn't scored a Premier League goal since April 22, I think is the stat. And as much as Liverpool loved him and Klopp loved him, he didn't play him, did he? Never found his way into those thoughts. So Divock Origi is a good bench option, even in a team that's struggling relatively to where he's been from. I see the logic in the signing. I see the romance of a kid that stepped in for Mo Salah and scored important goals against Barca in a Champions League semi. That's why he's a cult hero at Liverpool, not because he's a consistent goal scorer. We need a consistent goal scorer. And having Chris Wood in the form he's in now highlights how much that can add to a team. I just wanted to make a point on Fletcher's lad as well, Luca, who I've spoken to a couple of times. He's told me he has got a dream. He wants to put you in the best nursing home he can afford. And that means him becoming a Premier League footballer.
Do you know what? If they're going to wait on me hand and foot, I'll take it. I will take it.
Thank you. I thought I was getting a Pete Blackburn one-word answer there from you there, Temps, at the start. Lewis, someone's put Murillo, 80 million here. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. What's he worth, would you say?
Yeah, they're big numbers. I'm not quite sure we're at them numbers yet. But again, I think he's coming to the football club. He's coming to the Premier League, and he's shown a real good appetite of being hungry, being fearless. And I think if you look at how he plays, that's it. He's just fearless. And look at his attempt on against Tottenham. Stuff like that. Again, it just brings people closer to him and have that feel. And again, he's come into the football club, hit the ground running, and he's done really well. But again, I think talking about big numbers, ideally we don't want him to go. We want him to kind of keep on improving and blossoming and get more experience and grow with the football club and the team, continuing in the Premier League. So I think it is first and foremost, let's just keep under wraps and keep concentrating on hopefully that he keeps improving and keeps being here ready for next season.
I think you only get those numbers if a big club thinks you can be the A side. So if you're Liverpool, you pay that amount of money for Virgil van Dijk, but you're not paying that amount of money for the one next to him. If you're Tottenham, you're happy to pay the money for Mickey van der Ven because you've got the A side. And I look at Murillo, and he's come in and done fantastically well. For 10 million quid, I mean, he's got to be one of the bargains of the season. And he's multiplied his value already. But I think if he's really going to flourish in the Premier League, he needs to be the B side. I think he needs an A next to him because I think there are defensive limitations. I think he's wonderful with the ball. He's a confident kid. But I think he's got defensive limitations. He's not great under the high ball because of his size. We've got a real problem at set pieces regardless of who the centre-backs are. So he has to take his share of blame for that. And there are times when he gets caught out of position, which is natural to him. And I don't think that's going to change. So I think Premier League clubs will see him as a really good option and be prepared to pay money for him. But I think when you get to your 60s and 70s, you are then absolutely elite. You're in the Van Dijk category, the Ruben Dias category, the Mickey van der Ven category, players that you feel can play in a Champions League final for you if your life depends on it. And I think he's going to be a really good B if he's got a really good A next to him at a really big club. But I don't think he's going to go into anybody's team and be the A side of the argument. And I think that's going to limit the ceiling as to what his value ultimately is. Because he's good, really good potentially, but is he going to be completely European level elite? And if that's not the case, then that's going to limit exactly how much you get.
Can he become that? 2 years' time?
I don't know. I think he's going to need a good one next to him. Just looking at him, I just think he's got certain things that he's not elite at. I think when you look at, if you put him next to Virgil van Dijk, you've got a hell of a pair. You put him next to Mickey van der Ven, you've got a hell of a pair. And it then allows him to be the player that he needs to be. And I think that's going to be important for him.
What grade, that was a bit too close to the mic, sorry. What grade are you giving our recruitment, Fletch? This isn't a question, so I'll do it quickly. Because we've signed successes like Murillo and we've signed duds in a massively important position in goal. So you can't give it an A, but no. What would you give it this season?
I'd probably give it a solid C+. I don't think I'd give it any more than that. And I think that's based around the successes. But I think the number of players they've bought, you've got to get some right. So automatically you're going to be able to put a team together, which is where they are. So I'd say a C+. And I think this transfer window's got to be more of a B or an A if they're really going to kick on. Because I think there are as many, well, not quite as many mistakes, but there are enough mistakes just to knock the top off what could be a really successful time. And I think the big one, you're always, the amount of money you spend on an individual, you're going to be judged on that. The most they spent was on Sangare. It's probably been the most disappointing of all of them. So that then counters the bargain you get with Murillo. I think the issue with the Forest recruitment is they've got so many people in so many areas giving them so much information. It's not centralised per se. There's not a Dan Ashworth in there who's going to make all the decisions. So there's a lot of information coming into the room. They've got to decipher which way to go. The net is spread far and wide around the world, not just around Europe. So they're going to get some hits and some misses. I think if they could streamline it a little bit more, it would be a bit more efficient. But I still think they're hitting on more than they miss, but they're still missing on too many to make it a recruitment team that you'd say, I've got complete faith in?
What about you, Lewis? You've often said on the podcast, recruitment's everything. So what grade are you giving them for this season?
Yeah, no, I agree with Fletch. I think that you look at it, and you look at the likes of Murillo, and you look at Hudson-Odoi for the fee. You look at Alanga. Again, there's a lot of pluses in there. But again, when you make kind of your marquee signing and that doesn't go to better, you straight away you're kind of fighting against the tide. So listen, I think the jury's still out, and I think it's going to be an important summer, regardless of where they are. And I think they will have to come up, and I think they need to go and get 2 or 3 players, real key signings that are gonna improve this squad.
One reason it's an important summer as well, Mikey, is FFP. I saw a tweet from Kieran Maguire today about the new FFP proposed rules, which already put us behind the 8 ball with a few other clubs having to sell. A couple of the questions around the new stadium, yes or no? Does a new stadium feel inevitable with the kind of the commercial opportunities of a 40,000, 45,000 seater stadium? Does that ever start to appeal to you or not?
Honestly, no. I'm going to try and be a bit more positive than I was in my first answer about the manager. No, I have no desire to leave the City Ground. However, I kind of understand why it's at least being discussed. And, you know, you look at the amount of income that these new stadiums provide. And, you know, if you're like me and you've spent hours and hours trying to read some of these reports that have come out, the key takeaways I've taken from it is a lot of what you can do going forward is going to be based on the amount of money that you bring in. So therefore, those clubs with bigger stadiums and bigger revenues, bigger merchandising, bigger appeal, by definition are going to be able to spend more money in other areas like the recruitment. So by staying at the City Ground, you're going to not be in that group, and you're always going to have, I think, some sort of ceiling. So whether the league naturally will split almost into 2. You're going to have 10 teams with the new stadiums, 50,000 plus, that are by definition going to be able to spend more. And then some of the other stadiums, which I think they average at 22, 23, can't. So the argument for moving is to get into that first bracket. But what you lose from moving from a stadium like Forest have got is, I think, irreplaceable. You know, I watch a lot of, I got a lot of nods, which is good. I watch a lot of Premier League games, and the atmosphere dies after about 10 minutes because there's not that vigor in the stadium. They're all, you know, quote, the soulless bowls that you always say. I have no desire to go and watch my team in that. So whilst I'm being driven by finances dictate that if we do want to compete, then we're going to have to do it, there must be a way of trying to expand this stadium and get the infrastructure in this stadium rather than having to, you know, up ships and move, because I think a part of us will die if that happens. Sorry to be so emotional, but I have no desire to move.
I'm not necessarily sure from a pounds, shillings and pence perspective for Evangelos Marinakis it makes a great deal of sense either. I mean, all of a sudden, what we're saying to him is, now listen, you've spent all this money on the squad, right? And you've been as generous as any owner in the history of the club has ever been. What we'd like you to do now, if you possibly can, is spend 500 million quid on a new ground of your own money so that you can then spend more money on the squad. Which, if I'm an owner, I'm saying, really? Yeah, okay, well, let me go away and think about that for 5 minutes and I'll get back to you. I don't really think it's realistic. I think what they need to do is spend the money better. This goes back to the recruitment being more streamlined and hitting on more than you miss. You don't then need to spend more money. They're spending money at such a rate of knots now is because they're having to sign so many players because half of them are good and half of them aren't. If you have a higher hit rate that some Premier League clubs have got by being better in terms of identifying players and signing them and running your business in a more efficient way, you don't need to then go into the upper echelons of buying players, because whether we like it or not, this club has a ceiling in the Premier League. This club isn't going to become Manchester City. It's not going to start winning European Cups again. There is a ceiling. So we've got to identify what the ceiling is and maintain those ambitions accordingly. And if you're saying to the owner, do you want to build a new ground? Well, what are the council going to do to help him? Are they going to give him the City Ground land so he can sell it and then he can develop it and from those funds he can build a new ground? Or are we all just sitting here naively and saying to a fella from Greece who's come over and done remarkably well for us to get us back in the Premier League, why don't you dip your hand in your pocket and spend £500 million on buying us a new ground? It doesn't really make any sense. I'm with Mikey too. Forest play at the City Ground and that's the way it should be. And we've got to work out how that is, because that's special, that's our spiritual home, and that shouldn't change. But I think it's absolute pie in the sky just to think that this fella is going to constantly keep going to the cash point, rolling money out hand over fist. At some stage, they've got to start spending it more wisely and make the club run in a more efficient way so that the things we're talking about don't become a necessity. The only reason we need it now is because we've got to spend so much to put a competitive team on the pitch. If we could do that at better value, then the necessity to move from the City Ground wouldn't necessarily be there. Financial fair play wouldn't be an issue for us, so points deductions wouldn't be hanging over our heads. So there is an alternative way to do this that doesn't just involve spending more, and spending more season upon season. And I'd like to think that the people in the room could sit down and work out something based on that format rather than let's just keep spending money until somebody throws it out altogether. Because that to me just doesn't make a great deal of sense, either business-wise or football-wise.
One for Temps then, on the theme of cash points and, potentially treating fans like cash points. It hasn't gone down very well today, charging people £10 to get on a waiting list for a season ticket. You work in that sort of area at Trent Bridge. What's your take on it?
Yeah, £10 to join the waiting list at Forest. 7 years to the day that we played Rotherham at the City Ground in front of 16,000 people. That's the reality of where we are now. And I think we've all been enthused. The accusation on Twitter today was, where were you 6-7 years ago? I think we've all been reinvigorated. I think those of us that went to 5 games now go to 10 go to 20. Greg Mitchell goes home and away, scouts European opposition and everything else. But Forest have to increase their turnover through broadcast income, matchday income, player sales, broadcast rights, and there are only so many levers they can pull. And until they've got 40,000 seats, they have to do it through pricing. Now, we don't like that because the reality is we care about our club more than anybody else, but from a revenue perspective, broadcast trumps matchday. So it's trivial in a sense. How much are they going to make from putting? Well, the maths is easy, Fletch. I shouldn't ask myself that. If there's 5,000 people on a waiting list for a tenner, 50 grand a year, it's an absolute drop in the ocean. It's probably half of Divock Origi's weekly wage. So no, I wouldn't have done it. I think it leaves the wrong taste in a fan's mouth to charge them for the potential right to have something. But what's behind this is Forest trying to compete with those around them to get to where they need to be. And I'll just chuck in my 2 pence worth on the stadium debate. This is about negotiating with the council. We're not leaving the City Ground. This is either going to end in a negotiated fee to extend the lease, or I think more likely still, Marinakis is going to buy the freehold and then have the freedom to develop the City Ground. Then it's his land, there's no ongoing rent, and he can lay as many bricks as he wants. And that's the outcome that I want. 38,000, 40,000 people at the City Ground, new Peter Taylor stand, and I think universally here, and probably universally in the room, that's the best way forward for everyone. It's just a negotiation.
Just to add to what Temps is saying, my mate did a bit sums the other day. So if we stuck a tenner on every match ticket for every home fan next season for every game, 18 games, it comes to about £5 million. So what's that in terms of, in comparison with the wages that we're paying and the transfer fees we're paying? And it goes back to Fletcher's point. If we can just tighten up the recruitment and have that streamlined way of working. That's why I like the January transfer window. I think we bought 3 players. One was a goalkeeper that we needed. One was Reino, who's been criminally underused, and one was a kid. That's kind of what we need to do. We don't need 10, 15, 20 players. And we don't necessarily need to bump prices up because, like I said, it's a drop in the ocean. That's just my view on it.
Yeah, I think my worry about bumping prices up is about pricing generations out, really, the older fans and the younger fans. You can't really price out 18 to 25-year-olds because they're the ones who are going to be here for 40 to 50 years, hopefully. So I hope the club and the Premier League take that on board. We'll see. But yeah, that's my worry around it. One for Lewis. Most memorable past teammate and why? That could be they were good footballers or they were a bit mental. Jamal Abdoun.
Tell that Marlon King story about him booting balls into the Forest. I enjoyed that one. Or is that not safe for an audience? No, leave that one. Edit that one out, Matt.
Is it Jamal Abdoun? Because he sounded mental.
I wasn't with him, so he wasn't my time. So, just thinking, we had my period, we had really good dressing rooms. I can recall the only thing I can recall when I first came into the kind of reserve stroke first team under the Gary Megson era. I was kind of in the reserve room with kind of the bomb squad, the 10, 12 players that he'd basically made that wasn't going to play, and I think for that period of time, that was kind of my first insight to professional football, into the understanding of that this is a business, this is a game, and the things on the other side what a lot of people don't see. And yes, okay, he made his decision that them players wasn't for him, but again, the kind of reserve team manager and us as young reserve team players having to kind of deal with all that going on, it was a crazy period. And on that kind of period, we was training at times, players were wanting to get out of the football club, balls were going all over the place, we was just trying to train, and the reality was they didn't want to train. Do you know what I mean? It was just crazy. But again, it was a good insight to understand that kind of football isn't as rosy as everyone ever thinks, and when your time's up or when they want you out the door, there's a completely different side that not many see.
Were you still commentating when Megson was manager? Had you moved on by then?
I think I'd just about moved on.
Oh no, how sad
I was
for you?
still in conversation with certain players at that point. Stories weren't good. No. Alan Rodgers is the one to talk to about Gary Megson. You'd need about 3 hours, and he wouldn't take a breath, by the way. Yeah, not a happy time.
Another one for you. You can probably speak to it best, Fletch, I guess. Do you think we've missed the captaincy and passion of Joe Worrall? I feel he's been unfairly picked on. Other players have made big mistakes, but he's the one who's highlighted.
Yes, I do, and I think that the team has, in ways that maybe wouldn't be reflected on the pitch. I think it goes back to the heart and soul of the changing room, the players that can tell you what the club's all about, the players that it really matters to. If you've got one or two new ones who are shirking it and don't really fancy it, people like him and Ryan Yates and Brennan Johnson were the perfect people to tell them why they should be walking out there with their chest puffed out, their shoulders back, to represent the city and the club with pride. So I think we missed that. He was a real galvanising force around the dressing room with the players. He organised most of the events. If they were going to go to the cricket and Temps, you'd get the phone call. Joe would be the person that would be pulling everybody together, making sure that everybody was invited, making sure that team spirit was as good as it can be, which when you've got the volume of change that Forest have, is a difficult job, but it's also a really important job. And that, to me, is something that's been missing, sadly, this season, and may continue to be that way moving forward if they continue with all of the changes. What I would say, though, and this is just reality, I think it's becoming more and more prevalent around football that if you were a young player and you came through the academy and made it to the first team, you always got cut a bit more slack. It's completely gone the other way now, that expectation levels are even higher on those players than the ones that get brought in. And I think sometimes Joe and Brennan and Ryan are the victims of that, because I think too much is expected of them, when other players who come in with a fancy name from a fancy club are maybe cut a bit more slack because it feels fashionable and trendy to have that player in your team. And I think that happens not just here, it happens all around the Premier League and at lots of clubs. The way that players from academies are viewed now when they make the first team is different than what it used to be. So I do think we miss him. I think we miss Brennan. I think it's a big loss in the changing room right now. And I hope that even without that influence, they can still stay up. But I think that job would be easier with those characters and attitudes and passion for the club still in the changing room now, and it's not there.
It's funny watching Lewis doing the podcast sometimes. He has these facial expressions where he kind of rolls his eyes or goes, oh, I'm not sure about that sometimes. Did you get any slack cut for you coming through or not? You kind of went for a half eye roll there.
No, I was probably on the other end of it, to be fair. No, I think it's one of them. When you always come through it, and you're a homegrown player, you take a responsibility, and you have a responsibility straight away. That's just part and parcel of coming through. At times, do you feel like it's unjustified? Yeah, it is, but that's part and parcel of having that connection, of coming through the kind of academy and the youth team. I think fans look at you and they feel that connection. They feel like you're one of them, and they feel like they can sometimes vent their frustration through you. But again, back to the point about the change rooms and about Joe, I think that if you look across football, especially at the higher level, when there's an influx of change and a new manager comes in, and maybe the captain of the football club is not kind of the first name on the team sheet, they normally try and keep them around for 2-3 years, because it's a bedding in period of that. When other players come in, it's that person in the change room that is doing your job for you, and little things, maybe telling players where to live, helping players to look at restaurants, helping kind of their partners and their kids, schools, all these little things what helps football players settle in. I think when you have that kind of club captain, might not be playing week in, week out, but the job that they do kind of day to day in that training ground, sometimes it goes unnoticed, and they're very important to have in the change rooms. Sometimes that player might decide that he wants game time and he might want to go and play. Sometimes there might be a different option of that, and the manager can't help that. But I think it's a key thing when you transition into a new club. From a manager's point of view, you've got to try and have them big characters, them characters that have been there a long time, that know the club, know the surroundings, know the connections, to kind of, at times when you're under a little bit of pressure or you're struggling, they're the players that you lean on to help you through the bad times.
Any players you would take from any of the relegated teams if we stay up temps? The person said Ross Barkley. I've add Brereton Diaz maybe into that list. Any names for you?
Was that Emily's question, that one? I'd take a couple of lads out of Luton. I'd take Carlton Morris and Ross Barkley, which Fletcher just whispered in my ear. I think Lewis spoke earlier about having that guy in there who's had 5 or 6 years of consistently living with the level, having an influence week in, week out, and dragging up other players by the bootstraps with his work rate, execution quality. That's Ross Barkley. He's shone in a struggling team, as is Carlton Morris. And I think he'd be a good foil, actually, for Chris Wood and Taiwo if he was our third striker, you know, competing, trying to get the minutes in the same way, and then it was just down to the form book as to who started and finished those games. So they're the two that spring to mind for me. I don't think there's anybody at Sheffield United or Burnley that I'd be particularly enamoured with getting. So yeah, unless anyone can advance on that, I'd go Barkley and Morris.
Would you maybe take a look at the goalie at Burnley?
Yeah, he's a big fella, isn't he? But Matt Sells has nailed that for me. I think he's earned the right to be number one, and the last thing we should be doing is looking to recruit someone else. If we can offload Vlachodimos and Turner this summer, I'd be stunned. That's a 4-year contract, 60 clicks a week plus for Matt Turner. We're paying our second and third pick keepers like Premier League starters, so it's probably not high time yet to sign another goalie.
You wouldn't want either playing though, would you? If Sells got injured, so then you could be in a mess. If he got injured game 1 and was out for 6 months, you'd face the prospect of one of those two the rest of the way, then James Trafford wouldn't seem a bad option at that point.
I just think if they're playing on Flex, we've got to pay them, haven't we? And getting lads off that wage bill with the FFP sensitivities and the desire to bring boys in is going to be a tough thing.
C+. That's why it's a C+, because you're lumbered with players that you don't really want to play.
I'll give him a B+, A- for Sells, though. I think
yeah.
he's shown flashes.
Absolutely.
Also, the fact that we're taking no players virtually from the teams in the relegation zone says a lot that, you know, we should be higher in the league, really. I'll have to set an egg timer on this one for you, Mikey. So keep it as brief as you can. Would you bin off VAR? Especially when you see, I don't know if everyone's seen it, that Rotherham penalty last night where the bloke handballed it 3 yards out of the area. So, yeah, would you get rid of VAR?
Everybody knows. Oh, there we go. Is this working? Is this working? No. It's working, yes, but people know my opinion. Yes, I would. I think it's been an unmitigated disaster from minute one. Reasons for that, numerous. You know, I guess the reason it was brought in is because we, as a football community, couldn't accept referees making these mistakes, yet we give them technology and it's the same people in charge of the technology. Makes no sense to me. I think what they're bringing in this season, next season, sorry, which is the automated offside thing. I think that's good. I think that's good because that will erase the element of doubt. That's almost like a yes or a no, a bit like goal line technology. But for VAR, I just don't get it. You know, we could reel off 6 or 7 in the space of a few months that have absolutely screwed us, right? Honestly. And the fact that we get apologies on a Monday morning and they come out and say, oh, yeah, well, we're looking at that. We'll change it for next season. Well, it doesn't help us, does it? Doesn't help us. It always seems to go against us as well. So anyway, take the me moaning about VAR off. I just think realistically it's probably here to stay with the infrastructure and the amount of money invested in it. It seems to work better in other countries. I don't know if you guys watch a lot of European football, other than the Champions League where it's a bit of a disaster. I think if you watch some of the Dutch League, Spanish League, Italian League, it seems to work smoother there. I just think every week there seems to be a disaster with it. So Ref Watch on a Monday morning, honestly, they've got dedicated programs for it. And Matt's tapping his watch about how much of a disaster it's been. I just think you put it in the wrong hands of the wrong people, you're going to get the wrong decisions, and it just makes absolutely no sense to me. And I hate the fact it sucked the life and the emotion out of the game. And I will now shut up. So there's my view.
So last night, I'm at the Parc des Princes in Paris for Paris Saint-Germain against Barcelona. And the team sheet comes out, right?
That was his helicopter, by the way.
Yeah.
The reason he didn't make a comment is it's now parked on Meadow Lane. I'm getting a lift home, so I shouldn't be complaining too much. But he's gone from London to Paris to the Nav in a private chopper and pretended to ignore it for 20 minutes when it came to follow him.
Can I carry on now? Have you quite finished? So the team sheet comes out, and the officials last night, Anthony Taylor was the referee, Rob Jones, who's ballsed a few Forest games up, was the fourth official, Stuart Atwell was the VAR, and he got 2 assistants. So I'm sat there thinking, well, this is going to be interesting because the Champions League has a mandate that you don't look at much, you don't interfere if you're the VAR, and you have to be quick. So I'm thinking, well, they don't tick any of those boxes, any of them. So this could be a disaster. But you know what? They did it. They didn't look at much. When they did look at it, they did it quickly. And I left the ground thinking, why is that? Why can you go into the Champions League and officiate it that way, yet when you do it in the Premier League, as Mikey says, you take so long over so many decisions and go through it with such minute detail that, for Mikey's quote, you suck the life out of the game. So they can do it because they did it last night. They can't do it when they're here, which kind of tells you that that's the way that it's being administered as much as individual errors. But it did work for them in the Champions League last night. So I don't know what the answer is. Mikey's nailed it. The money's been spent. They're not going to undo it. Automated offside's okay, but that could take a little bit of time. Don't expect that to see that too quickly. That happens a bit slower in the Champions League. But I think it's the worst thing that's been brought into football in my lifetime. Goal line technology was enough. I always maintain that. If the ball's crossed the line, that's a big moment. That's the only real thing that I need to know 100% whether it's right or wrong. The rest of it I can live with. I've seen my team get decisions. I've seen my team not get decisions, part and parcel of being a football fan. I think they should get rid of it. I think they should get rid of it today, right now. Let's not see it again. But they won't, unfortunately. So we've just got to hope that by the time the new season comes around, they can have a look at it, maybe give them a bit of training, 1 or 2 seminars. Howard Webb could maybe spin his... I don't know what he does, but I don't like it. Hate it. Absolutely hate it. I listen to the conversations as well on a game-by-game basis. And I wish I could record it and play it here, because it's absolutely unbelievable sometimes. I'm sitting there thinking, what the fuck are you talking about? Because I can hear the fourth official talking to the referee, and the referee must be thinking the same as me. What's he on about? Because it makes no sense a lot of the time what they're saying. And I think, people think it's a conspiracy. People think certain clubs are getting it. It's just incompetence. There are certain individuals who do that job who aren't fit for purpose. And until they get rid of those and they get better standards set in terms of how they recruit the referees and the assistants, it's going to be a shit show for a while, I'm afraid. But I'm going to try and record it on my phone one Saturday. And when we sit here again in the summer, I'll play it here and you'll think it's a wind-up. I guarantee you'll think it's a wind-up.
We were going to finish by 8:45, but my dad's driven from Telford, Mikey's brother's driven from Sheffield, and they've sat here tearing up raffle tickets for about the last 45 minutes, and they haven't finished, so we'll keep going a bit longer.
Just do one more hour. Yeah. Just one last hour. Get out of
there. One of the questions One of the questions about Taiwo Lewis. I think you felt he looks in all sorts of trouble just before he went out injured. If he comes back, what are you expecting from him realistically in these final 5 games?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think anything at this point now is a bonus to have him back in and around the squad. I can recall, I know we had a conversation about, it was the Liverpool game when he came on. It was at one point where he tried to chase Van Dijk back and he just looked like he'd played 100 minutes and he'd only just come on, and that was quite alarming to be in that kind of physical condition at that point. But again, I think that he's had that time away. If he can now come back in and around a squad and be again a help and a bonus, you're not going to turn him away, because at times, again, throughout his career at Nottingham Forest, he's come up with the goods at the right time. So to have another striker available to call upon, I think it's only a bonus.
How much are you expecting, Temps, from him? I'll throw it to you as well.
I don't necessarily think he'll start another game this season. I think off the back of Chris Wood's form, Jory was out on Chris Wood for a long time. We spoke about us adapting, him adapting, whatever. But it's clicked, hasn't it? Looking at his personal performances, aside from vibrating that post against Spurs, which is still shaking now, when he could have tapped it in and given us a far better weekend, I think he's earned the right to start the rest of the season. And there's no way Taiwo comes back and he's match ready for 75, 80 minutes. He needs blooding slowly. He needs to find form. He needs goals to displace Chris Wood. I don't think it's going to happen. I think from this point on, we back Chris Wood for the final 6 games of the season.
Temps, do you not ask the question now? I'll stick this to all of you. Is it not time to ask the question now, though, as they go into the summer, whether they've just got to accept that he's never going to be fit? I mean, this is 2 seasons in a row. The injuries follow him. Some players are unlucky like this. Some people have body types that get injured. Some people can't stay out the treatment room. Lewis, you'll have played with him. I'm not ever sure that you're going to look at Taiwo Awoniyi and say, he was available for 35 games this season. He was available for 32 games. It's not going to be possible. I don't think that's going to be him moving forward. Now, if that is the case, the Forest have to move on from him this summer, because that can't be your number one. If you can't rely on having your number one striker in the team from one week to the next, surely you have to look at it and say, even though the fans like him, even though he's got a good goal-scoring record, when he's on the pitch he's a factor, we're a better team with him than without him. Surely you have to look at it and say, but we can't rely on him, so therefore we have to move away and find somebody else in the transfer market who can do that job and be the first choice number 9. I don't know how they can persist with him in these circumstances, because he can't stay fit.
I think luck's going to run out in the sense that when Taiwo's been unfit, Chris Wood stepped up and stepped in. There's been times when Woody's had knocks, Spurs back end of last year and all the rest of it, and Taiwo's come back in. It's been fortuitous. There's been very few occasions where they've both been match ready and able to impact a game in the way that they do when they're at the best. And you only got to go back 6 months to a time when Chelsea were looking at Taiwo Awoniyi. And we thought maybe he'd be the sale in January that kept FFP from the door in the future. And there's a potential 20, 25 million pound profit on him. Now every single team, like our physios, like our coaches, are thinking, does this guy have the durability for a Premier League season? And for me, based on what I've seen, the answer is probably not. Would I cash in my chips and sell him and replace him? Well, you're not getting market value now, are you? We signed him for 18 million. If he was worth twice that when he had that great form, back end of last season, started this season, 9 in 9, I think it was. He was at that point a £30 million striker. Unfortunately, he's not now. It's in him. He can make a contribution. But no, I don't think he is the answer right now.
Who's going to buy him, though, without taking it here? Who's going to risk him, I suppose,
but this
is my
is your
question.
problem. Whether you can find somebody to buy him or not, and whether you can get 30 million quid for him or not, you have to have a number 9 that's better than what you have, that you can rely on. I know that you can never foresee injuries, but you've got to have someone that you believe is going to be available for the majority of your games. And if you've ended up signing one and it's all gone wrong, you can't just go, well, we've got to live with it now, because otherwise we're not going to get market value. You've still got to get a number 9, because you're not going to be a successful team and get better if you're not scoring goals consistently. And Lou's already made the point. At Chris Wood's age, 34 is he by the start of next season, you don't necessarily want him to be your first choice number 9. Divock Origi's not been the answer. Ilanga doesn't score enough goals, doesn't convert enough chances. So you need that number 9 you can rely on. So if you don't think he's going to be fit for more than 50% of the season, I don't think, Lou, you've got any choice but to go and sign another one, have you?
No, listen. I think it's tough. I think sometimes, as you alluded to, sometimes you can play with players and they can do everything. They can be in the gym morning, noon, and night. And sometimes it's continue to break down, or very easy to break down, pick up a lot of muscle injuries, and not for the fault of anyone. And I think if you look at him and his thing in the background, the club and the recruitment, when they bring him in, all that information will be part of the process. I think. Sometimes you look at it, is this season, has he been trying to come back? Sometimes you can start, trying to come back too quick and continue to break down. Sometimes I've been around players that they need a summer to completely shut the body down, completely have that rest, and then start the pre-season and build that foundation properly through that period of time. So this time next year, he might have played every game. So I think that's the information that we're not privy to, and there'll be conversation in the background. But again, back to your point that if he can't continue to play a lot of games in a run of time and he's always breaking down, then you can't rely on that.
Final question, since my dad and Lawrence have got RSI injuries after that, but they're done. 3 teams to get relegated, and I'll just go along the panel. Who are the 3 who are going down, Fletch?
Yep, Sheffield United, Burnley, Luton. And if anybody says anything else, then we should all just chuck it in.
Thames?
As you were, I see us beating the drop by 3 points, and I think those 3 are stranded.
Lewis? Yes. Mikey?
Yeah, I'm going to go the same, and I will say there's a bit of synergy around our last home game. So last season, Arsenal, 5:30, we knew what we had to do. This season, Chelsea, 5:30, we're going to know what we're going to have to do, and I reckon that's where we do it.